let's get started, Colonel, with what's going on right now in the Middle East. And how did you find this visit of Anthony Blinken? What is he trying to do, in your opinion? He's trying to convince the Netanyahu administration to go after some sort of political settlement, or he's there to intimidate Iran and other countries not to attack Israel?
Yeah, I don't think he's trying to intimidate Tehran. I think he's in a scramble to try and somehow placate Netanyahu. He's trying to avoid any kind of an escalation from the Iranian side because I think that, I'm just honestly taking a look at this from the perspective of any country on the planet. It doesn't matter if you like them or not. If you attack someone and kill them and assassinate them in the capital city of that country during a presidential inauguration or during the time of that of an invited guest, you're going to get a response. I mean, and so it's kind of crazy to suggest we're trying to tell Iran not to respond again, especially after Israel attacked and destroyed one of their embassy compounds in Syria earlier this year. I mean, nobody's going to not do any of that. But Iran has said that one of the reasons why they're using a lot of their what are these various groups that they have throughout the Middle East and Hezbollah, some of these others, is because of the Israeli operations in Gaza. And so they said that that's what's motivating a lot of this. So Blinken appears to be thinking, okay, well, if that's what's motivating, let's see if we can get that off the table quickly so that there's a ceasefire and there's no reason for you guys to continue on. I don't think that that's going to succeed. And I think that probably one of the reasons why Iran hasn't done anything yet is because they're not ready. I think that they may be, and I don't have any inside information, but just looking at things, in context of like the last 10 years, not even just recently, I don't think that they're going to allow this one to pass because of all the other things too, without doing something relatively substantial. But they always have to try to thread the needle to not make it so big that it invites a bigger response to them and destroys, some of their armed forces or their people, et cetera, in ways that they can't handle. But they have to try and reestablish some kind of deterrence. That's what I think Blinken is trying to do. But his job is really going to be undercut by the fact that Benjamin Netanyahu almost never listens to the United States, whether it's the Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, or the president. He pretty much does whatever he wants to do. And he has not been shy about pushing back in public and directly repudiating some of the things that we've said we want. And I think that the assassination of Hania in Tehran was one of the biggest in-your-face kind of things that there is, because our stated political objective for the United States is to get a ceasefire and to bring that situation to a negotiated settlement. And when our partner assassinates the senior negotiating partner for the other side, I mean, it's hard to interpret that any other way than that Israel doesn't want a negotiated settlement. So it's not very clear to me that Blinken is going to succeed in this, but I think that's what he's trying to do.
And it seems that he's trying to just putting pressure on Iran and other countries. At the end of the day, we know that the main player, as you've mentioned, is Israel. And nobody knows what's going on right now in Israel, because it seems that there are differences between even Netanyahu and his Ministry of Defense in terms of what's going on and how they're going to continue this conflict in Gaza. How do you find the internal conflict within the Netanyahu administration? Do you think that would be substantial when it comes to the policy in Gaza, or that doesn't make any sort of difference when it comes to the U.S. and the policy that we are expecting from the United States to go after some sort of political settlement? Which one would be better, in your opinion, to consider?
Yeah, I think that the internal disputes within the Netanyahu administration, I think, are more like semantics than any substantive differences in policy. I mean, like, there have been a lot of public dispats between Yoav Gallant, for example, Benny Gantz and Netanyahu. But when you look at what they actually want to do, it's not a whole lot different. One thinks it should be done this way, one thinks it should be done that way, but nobody is talking, about ending the war or not succeeding or not accomplishing their tactical objectives, even though I argue strenuously that they're pursuing the militarily unattainable objectives, that they're trying to seek a political outcome with military means that cannot and will not be accomplished. But they're all pretty much of the opinion that they want to win with military power to bring a position politically where they have peace for their people, and there's no more risk of terrorist attacks or rockets being fired at them from every place, whatever. They're just not going to succeed with that. So when you have, maybe they have one thinks you should do it this way, one thinks this way, whatever, but they're all generally within this framework. But you have the United States that says, we want to be going this direction. We want to be going away from military stuff and bring some kind of stability. I won't say peace, because there's no chance for peace in the foreseeable future. We're talking the generational kind of possibilities, but you can get to some kind of stability, because most all the parties do want to live in peace. But to get there, the hatred is now so high among the sides that it's going to take a generation to get that tamped down to where any kind of peace might be possible. But even to get to the theoretical possibility, you've got to first get stability and to end the fighting. So that's kind of what the United States wants. And so how you're going to square this band of thing with Israel and this band of preferences with the United States is unclear, especially, and it may be exclusively, because the U.S., who has enormous leverage, won't use it. We could compel Israel to come into our direction here and to line up, to at least fall within something that's doable here, but we won't do it, because you saw what happened when Biden even attempted to withhold one category of ammunition, the 2,000-pound bombs, earlier this summer. Netanyahu flatly called him out, and then they had lots of their allies in the United States that found friendly voices here that piled on against Biden for daring to withhold anything at all from Israel, meaning that now then what little leverage he may have had, and it didn't have much effect, now it's gone. So without any kind of backboned leadership in the United States willing to say, hey, here's our national interest. You can have your own, because you're your own country. But if you want my bombs and my support and my political support, like at the United Nations, then you're going to have to operate within these parameters. And if you don't, then you're on your own and we're not going to help you. That's what we should do. But we have never done anything remotely like that. And now everybody's paying the price because of it, to include us.
And the other point of the conflict in the Middle East would be how the policy of the United States is resonating with Turkey, Saudi Arabia, UAE, these countries who were close to the United States before this conflict started. They wanted to have a better relationship with Israel. Right now, it seems that the policy of the United States right now is not helping them in that direction. They're just considering distancing themselves from the United States.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly what I say. Because we won't use our leverage to bring Israel into conformity with the direction that we want to go, which is very similar to how these other nations want to go as well. Then yeah, we're losing credibility and reputation even in their eyes, and because they're saying, well, there's no value in trying to go with the United States when they're unwilling to use their leverage over their own partner. And now then, of course, what leverage does these other countries have, and what motivation and incentive do they have to try and stick with us when they say that we're basically just being used by the Israelis? I mean, that's the blunt, and to a lot of Americans, it's an unpleasant sound and they don't like to hear it, but that's the truth. I mean, you can just look at the fundamentals and the realities on the ground. Whatever Netanyahu says, we do. I mean, when he was brought before when the International Criminal Court made these designations against him, when the UN bodies said there is a plausible reason to think there was a genocide going on, when we, in light of all that, bring him into Washington, D.C., and give him the highest honor that we can give a foreign head of state, a joint session of Congress, and he gets interrupted 58 times with applause, etc., even with all of that stuff, then who's running the show here? It's not President Biden, it's Benjamin Netanyahu. And that is true. It's not just a pejorative. I mean, you see it when we have said so many times we want this outcome, we want this to happen, and they just completely obliterated it. When they violate in that international law that we claim to support, like the destruction of the embassy compound, like the assassination in Tehran, etc., you could dislike those people, but you can't just wantonly violate international law and then expect other people to follow it, because they're not going to. And they're going to see these duplicitous things, and it's not just an embarrassment, or not just we find it distasteful, but it's like, y'all are getting dangerous because we don't know what to believe in, and we don't know who's in charge of anything here. And why would we want to get behind that? So I think that you're seeing more people distance, to include NATO ally Turkey, to include even, I think, in Europe with the Hungary, with their leader there. He, of course, openly wants Trump to win the White House, and I don't know that he's going to. But he's not in on the current administration, what they're doing. And so you see that we're losing friends and allies, and even in our own blocks, much less outside of that. So, yeah, I think you're right. That's the trend that's going on.
Yeah. And when, in your opinion, when Anthony Blinken's talking with Netanyahu, does he ask him, what's the main goal? You cannot kill each and everybody in that region. You cannot continue. This doesn't working. Nobody can accept it. Even Europeans who were trying to be silenced, they cannot be silenced anymore. That's why you have to stop it. You have to find a solution for this conflict. But it doesn't seem that Anthony Blinken and the policy coming out of Washington has any sort of leverage on Netanyahu.
Well, when you see Anthony Blinken from Jerusalem yesterday making this statement that effectively whatever Israel does or whatever happens, we're going to have their back militarily, as though there's some kind of Article 5 NATO type defense agreement, which there isn't. But when he says that out loud, and we've already demonstrated it with action one time earlier this year when we literally sent the U.S. Air Force in to intercept all those drones out of Iran, that's de facto what does exist here. So when you're starting your negotiation by telling the Israeli side that we have your back no matter what motivation do they have to give you anything? And of course, the answer is nothing. And so right now, even if it's just Israel and the U.S. against the world, they're thinking that's a good deal. We're going to do that because by all estimates are Netanyahu and many in Israel, not just him, but certainly many of the leaders in the country and among the people think that, okay, this is our one shot. Everybody already hates us because of what's been going on and how many Palestinians have been dying. So we can't lose anything more on that. So let's take the opportunity to resolve the Palestinian process once and for all. Let's get rid of the Hezbollah north of our border in Lebanon, and then let's finally get rid of Iran. That's what they want to do. They think that somehow they can eliminate all their problems, and then it's a generational thing. And then for, the rest of time, they're going to be safe and secure. The problem is that's irrational thinking, because it can't be done. Short of them literally using nuclear weapons and nuking everyone. And then, of course, that's got predictable responses that would happen. But so short of nuclear weapons, it can't be done conventionally, because as you point out, even Europe is on the edge right now, turning against them. Obviously, in the United States, at the Democratic convention right now, you have Democratic protesters trying to tell the president, stop doing this stuff and start taking care of the Palestinian people. So we're on an edge as well. And if they keep going down this path and the casualty counts keep going up, there is a point somewhere. We haven't reached it yet, but it's got to be close to where that things are going to turn against them. And now then it won't matter if the United States stands behind them, because others will stand against them. And that is what I've been warning about from the beginning, that Israel, their actions threaten to turn the whole thing that they have built since 1948 against them, and possibly irreparably.
Yeah. And shifting the gear to the conflict in Ukraine right now in the Kursk region, and today Lavrov was talking about that it's not possible to negotiate with Zelensky anymore, because this attack on the Kursk bridge on the Russian soil, it's something beyond what has been what they have been doing so far more than 2 years. And on the other hand, there's talking. He said that without the United States, Kiev mentally and physically was not capable of doing this. On the other hand, we have Washington talking about that we didn't do anything. We didn't know what's going on there. We have a lot of mercenaries there, and this saying that we don't know, we didn't provide intelligence, anything to them. But at the end of the day, they have to find a common ground to negotiate, to talk. It doesn't seem that we are having that right now.
Yeah. Well, it doesn't have to be common ground if you're not going to try and find a negotiated solution. And I think that I know a lot of people think that, Russia's the evil empire and all this, and Putin, had this unprovoked attack in February 2022, et cetera. And you can argue what was provoked and what wasn't. But what you can't say is that Putin has not been trying to find a diplomatic solution from the beginning. I mean, you can go all the way back to the Minsk agreements in 2014, 2015. You can go back to what he was trying to get done in December 2021. You can go back to what he did in Istanbul in March, April of 2022. Even I think in 2023, there was another attempt with Turkey. And what he said in June, that, one more opportunity. Here's what we're willing to negotiate with. And it wasn't every time he talks, the clock, it gets worse and worse for the Ukraine side, but he's still saying we're willing to negotiate until this incursion into Kursk. And now then, at least I think it was the deputy chief of mission for the Russian United Nations team said, yeah, that's all off the table. Everything that was offered in June is now off the table. And many in Russia, to include the population figures that are talking about, media types or whatever, they're saying we just need to go all the way and take all of Ukraine now. Forget about going to the river. Forget about just these 4 oblasts. We need to now defeat this mentality that's going to attack us. Because Putin talked today. He was at the anniversary, I think, of the Beslan terrorist attack from, I don't remember, 20 years ago, something like that. And he was equating what happened to Beslan to what happened in the Kursk region, which to him is a terrorist attack that's going to be replicated or replaced and repealed and pushed back. That's what he's viewing this as. And so why would you want to have a negotiated settlement with somebody who did that? And it's beyond crazy to me, just lunacy in my view, for anyone to think, and Zelensky apparently is one and has said this, Yermak definitely did, that anybody thinks that you can have this incursion into Russia and that Russia, Putin, is going to go, oh, dang. All right, well, I didn't see that coming. So, okay, you're right. Let's just make a negotiated settlement from a position of weakness, and I'll just end on terms of favorable to you. Number one, Zelensky would never do that. The minute he thought he had an advantage, he would push even harder, and he would keep going. He's not going to negotiate now because he could already have done it. If he was willing to negotiate, he already had the best conditions he was going to ever get in November, December of 2022. That was when they were at their height, that they could have had the best negotiating position available. And even then June was the second least bad, and he's rejected them all. So the idea that, now then he would do it and make a negotiated settlement then is ridiculous because he could have done it now. So that's putting Putin in the position of saying, if this guy's clearly not serious about having a negotiated settlement, why do I even want to put another offer on the table? Now I'm going to use my military power, whether it takes another 6 months, another year, another 2 years. We can methodically just crush this down, and then we'll just keep going until we have a military victory, and then we don't have to worry about negotiating anything. It'll just be terms of surrender. And I think that is the more possible. That'll come at a very high cost for Russia. But given what has happened here, I think that is the more likely outcome than any kind of a negotiated settlement. Otherwise, this thing just keeps dragging on a long time, and that doesn't help anybody.
When it comes to the main reason of this attack on the Kursk bridge, as you mentioned, one of the reasons would be find a better position to negotiate with Putin. That wasn't the case. It seems that it doesn't work. But in your opinion, what the Biden administration is seeking for right now with this conflict, with this attack on the Kursk region, how they're going to benefit from this, if they're not benefiting from this, and why they didn't try to convince Zelensky not to go in that direction?
Yeah, that's a little bit more challenging because you saw the reaction of Senator Lindsey Graham, who almost looked like a schoolboy cheerleader, going out there and saying, yay, go team, kill more Russians. It's cool. I mean, it's just it was humiliating. I actually did a show on that on my deep dive channel that I was, as an American, humiliated and shamed that this is somebody who represents the elite in our country, who has no idea how wars work, who has no conception of what the cost is going to be for Ukraine for this operation here. The idea that you can take whatever the number it actually was, 15, 20,000, 12,000, I don't know. I've heard all these different figures, but let's say it's the most, 20,000 troops attack into a country, a nuclear power the size of Russia, and have any delusions that it's going to have any kind of positive result, whether it takes a few weeks or a few months or even longer, that eventually that's going to get crushed. I just can't understand the mentality that would think that was a good idea, whether it's in Kiev or in Washington. It should have been rejected out of hand. I mean, those guys should have been used in the east, where Ukraine is being pushed back and they're buckling in a couple of places where it could have strategic implications if they fail there. Now, if you fail up here and you get all these, whatever the number of thousands of troops was, if they end up either getting killed or captured or shoved out, and you didn't reinforce your eastern flank and that buckles, I mean, people are going to be coming and asking some pretty hard questions of their leader there, because it'll be exposed of how foolish this was. Now, of course, I argue that even sending them to the east would only have delayed things a little bit more. Nothing is going to reverse it. The rational thing to do was to take in the best deal they can get in June, when Putin finally made that offer, eating crow and taking the humiliation and saying, hey, we got to do this, because if we keep fighting, we're going to be defeated, because that's logically where this is going. And there is no logic behind what's going on here. I find it very puzzling, whether in Kiev or Washington. It just doesn't make any sense.
Do you think that the Russians, those preconditions that the Russian mentioned before the Swiss summit, the peace summit in Switzerland, do you think those are still on the table to negotiate on, or they're
No,
not?
I don't think they're on the table at all. I think that, and I've heard from several sources that inside Russia that I guess the people's thoughts right now and the public opinion is turned sharply against any kind of negotiated settlement. And they say, drive all the way to Kiev if you need to. They want a military victory here. Now, obviously, if you're the family member of somebody who's in the military, you don't want your son or daughter to die. But right now, I think the Russians as a nation I think that this incursion into their country, and just imagine, if this was in your country, or for me, if it was in the United States, if some foreign power in attacked 300 square kilometers into Texas or into Arizona, would we be satisfied with just pushing them back across the border? Heck no, of course not. We would want to crush and defeat whatever force did that. And why would anyone think that Russia is going to be any different? The only thing I could think theoretically, hypothetically, is if the people didn't understand that Russia can do those things. Maybe they think, well, Russia's not strong enough. They can't actually do anything. So maybe we can hurt them and get them to a negotiation, which again, it was ridiculous, because they're not going to negotiate anyway, the Ukraine side. But that's not the case. And the Russians overwhelmingly do have the capability, whether faster or slower. They're definitely going slower than I ever imagined they would. I truly thought they would have gone much bigger militarily not long after the failed 2023 Ukraine offensive. I thought that Russia would go big sometime in the spring, in the winter, or perhaps the spring. They never have. They still have it to this day. Maybe they will later. Maybe they won't. Maybe they're just going to say, we're just going to be fine with the slow, steady pressure until finally they end up collapsing at some point. I don't know. But what I know is, even if they take that route, they have the wherewithal, they have the men, they have the material, they have the industrial capacity, all of which the Ukraine side doesn't have. And at some point, time will just do what it always does, and Ukraine will lose the war if they don't change their course of action.
The other thing that is so dangerous right now is the desperation in Ukraine within the Zelensky administration. He's asking for long-range missiles to hit Russia. And do you think that Washington gonna let them use long-range missiles, or send long-range missiles to Ukraine to use them against Russia? Because that would be huge if they do that.
Yeah, it would depend on what they struck. But I mean, obviously, we keep on crossing these these danger zones with everything, to include the F-16s and with other long range missiles, the medium type long range missiles, I guess, if you want to use that term. But so far they have been limited to the tactical area. Now it's been expanded a little bit though into the Kursk area, because some of our stuff was used there. Of course, we had that disastrous thing that happened in the Crimea a month or two back with the people on the beach, which obviously also made a lot of Russians mad. But we don't have that many long-range ATACMS, especially, number one. Our own inventory is pretty small, so we don't have a whole lot to give to them. But then the question would be, towards what end? What do you want to do with that? I get it. You want to hurt Russia. You've shown that you love to make them bleed and hurt and all that kind of stuff. And part of me understands that. I mean, your country was invaded. So that part is reasonable. What's not reasonable, though, is to take actions that can't succeed, but that can rebound and harm you worse. And that's what I think would happen if we gave the approval to use these long-range weapons. Because, number one, I think Russia's going to take some lateral reciprocal actions. Maybe they're going to help Iran in the Middle East use some of their weapons against us, or the Houthis perhaps, or maybe even in parts of Africa or elsewhere in the Middle East. Some of our opponents there, other places we have terrorist groups, maybe they'll supply some of them. Who knows? But if we're doing it with Russia's enemies, why would they forever and never do it with our opponents? And I think the more we do of this kind of stuff, and especially if these rockets hit something of importance, then the more likely it is that we're going to get it somewhere else. And that's just the nature of mankind.
Do you find any sort of a strategy behind this attacking on nuclear power plants in Zaporizhia and right now in the Kursk region?
It's insane. There is no, and this has been going on since early in the war, where Russia captured the Zaporizhia NPP pretty early, and then it was shelled, and there was lots of threats of somebody was going to hit it and make it a dirty bomb, etc. And of course the West was absurdly saying, "Oh, Russians are going to do it. The Russians are going to capture it with their people and then launch a dirty bomb attack," which of course is irrational and makes no sense at all. But that eventually didn't work. And I thought and I hoped that was going to be the end of it, because it is incredibly irrational. What possible military benefit would you have to cause a nuclear catastrophe on your own territory? Now, do you think that somehow that can be manipulated to be blamed on the Russians, and that would cause the rest of the West to go, "Oh my gosh, this is terrible, dude. Now we're going to join the war against Russia"? I mean, number one, you would have to be stupid beyond description, anybody in the West, to believe that Russia would cause a dirty bomb on the where their own soldiers had control of it. And if you did it then by this alleged claim that the Kursk incursion was designed to go to the Kursk nuclear power plant and do the same thing there, I mean, what rational country in the West would be supportive of that? Because then that would mean that Russia would then, in retaliation, would not use a dirty bomb, but would use a nuclear missile onto other territories. Anyone who would support something like that. So it is only in the twisted mind of anybody in Ukraine who wants to do something like that to try and draw the West in. It just defies any kind of just humanity, because it'll get a lot of your people killed and could expand the war into the nuclear range, where you're talking millions of people could die. And nobody in the West should support any of that. And if they don't make that unequivocally clear right now behind the scenes, then they sure as hell better be ready to do it on the other side of it and say, "We got no part in this. We're not going to do anything. Now you've got this nuclear mess on your own territory here, and you're going to deal with it." But I don't see very much leadership and anybody with the backbone to do that kind of stuff anywhere in the West, unfortunately. So I worry about it.
Yeah. How do you see Germany right now when it comes to this attack, this offensive on the Kursk region? The German publication Bild was talking about German tanks on Russian soil again. And how do they benefit from this conflict? Germans, they're losing a lot.
Of course, they gain nothing. It's nothing but a lose for Germany. I mean, they've given away lots of their equipment. Of course, most of it's burned on the battlefield like any other tank. There's nothing special about it. But it plays right into Russian fear and paranoia, and just strengthens and solidifies the popular support of Putin inside of Russia because of that. I mean, this whole image of Nazi tanks, German tanks again on Russian soil plays really big in Russia, and it just increases their morale. And you remember early in the war, there was all this talk about how, oh, Russia has poor morale. They don't believe in what they're doing. They're going to eventually turn against their leadership, and there's going to be a coup and all this kind of stuff. Well, if there was ever any chance of that, and I don't think there was, and that kind of stuff, this kind of actions eliminates that possibility. And now then the Russian people are as unified as almost like us after 9/11. Everybody was together, Republicans, Democrats, independents, whatever. Everybody was behind the president. That's what we're creating in the West for Russia right now, to make sure that Putin has a complete free hand to do whatever he wants, because the population will support it. And why would they do anything differently given what we're doing? So it is a lose for Germany. It's a lose for Europe. It's a lose for the United States. And it's definitely a lose for Ukraine.
After all, we're witnessing that the military aid and the money that they're sending to Ukraine is reducing substantially. And just beneath all of this propaganda that we are helping Ukraine, we are sending this, that. But you see that is reducing and reducing. Do you think that at the end of the day, when this 2024 presidential, I think this is so important, and many people outside of the United States doesn't understand how these conflicts are connected to the domestic policy of the United States right now. And it seems that the Biden administration, as long as this presidential election is going on, is not going to let any sort of substantial victory of Russia in Ukraine. They're going to attack in just this attack, this offensive, which doesn't make sense. But they, at the end of the day, they went with this plan to attack on Russian soil. But how do you think when this 2024 presidential election is over, we're going to have some sort of sanity in the foreign policy of the United States? I'm not talking about Democrats or Republicans. Do those people who are policymakers, or who are not Democrats or nor Republican, who are behind the scene, who are deciding about everything, who are putting pressure on Trump for 4 years to send weapons to Ukraine?
The short answer is no. I don't have any optimism or confidence that that's going to change after the election, just because it seems to be a perpetual condition. Too many of the political elite and the foreign policy elite from whatever party keeps going down the direction you're talking about. And you see, I mean, you pointed out they were putting pressure on, they put pressure on Obama to do a lot of that. He did a little bit. They put pressure on Trump. He didn't do a lot at first, but then later did. And of course, Biden just opened the floodgates. And when you talk to people in the Trump administration, the Trump campaign right now, should he win, he says he wants to end the conflict, but he also has some interesting caveats to some of that. As long as this or that happened, and if Russia doesn't do what I want, then we'll give even more weapons. So it's unclear whether any kind of sanity is going to prevail, because in my view, it's not hard. It's not complicated, rather, to what needs to happen, and that is this war needs to come to a quick and rapid end. It needs to be just cauterized off as quickly as possible. The NATO's flank can be strengthened or whatever, but Ukraine can never be in NATO. You can be a part of the economic, you can have bilateral relationships, that's fine, but the war needs to be over, and Russia's fear of having NATO in Ukraine on its border there needs to be eliminated. And then we can go on with trying to reestablish long-term security relationships within Europe and economic ties and et cetera, which could benefit everybody. That's what we should do. That is absolutely possible, though it's much more painful now to get it done than it would have been in April of 2022. But now then it's something that still has to happen. And before this Kursk invasion, it would have been less difficult. Now it's going to be even more difficult, but it's going to require the West to eat a lot of crow and somebody to stand up with some leadership backbone and saying, I don't care about public opinion. Here's what needs to happen, and here's what we're going to do. I think enough people would follow behind that. I think a lot of people in Europe would love to have something like that to give them the cover to do what they already believe needs to be done, because most of the European countries, from what I can understand, doesn't want to have a conflict with Russia. They don't want this conflict to go on at all. They don't have anything to benefit from this conflict between Russia and Ukraine. They want that thing to get over with because they don't like paying higher energy taxes. They would love to have that Russian gas continue to come through at the lower rates and what it's costing them to get it elsewhere, et cetera. And they don't want to keep spending all their money and tanks and everything else, sending it to Ukraine to get blown up. They don't want to do that. But we have decided that is what everybody's going to do. So no one wants to go against us. And so even if they don't like it, they keep going and doing it. But in the absence of somebody in the United States, whether it's in a Harris or Trump presidency, it's starting in January of next year, that's some version of that is probably going to continue on, unless, and the wild card is, or maybe it's not such a wild card, but if Russia ends up winning this war, then you're going to have a big, big problem, because now then we're going to be facing the United States with either doing something even more stupid and escalating this war to try and somehow get involved militarily to keep Russia from winning, or we're going to have to eat a lot of crow and expose that everything that we did, everything that NATO did, everything that all the European Union did failed, and that Russia beat us. And then we're going to have to live with the aftermath of that. Now, that's actually preferable to the other one of doing something even more stupid, which we could have catastrophic results and could easily spark a European-wide war that we would get drawn into and millions could die. And I'm worried about that because I don't see any leadership quality. I don't see the fundamentals or the possibility of someone rising up to do the right thing, that has the moral courage, that has the intellectual and the backbone to stand up to public pressure and say, this is the right thing to do, and this is what we're going to do. Shut up and get in line. Instead, whatever the people say, people just cower, their tail gets tucked, or they're afraid that they might lose an election, or that people may say mean things about them in media, and so they'll just give in and do stuff that doesn't make any sense in the hope that maybe it won't blow up. I see a lot of that, but I don't see a lot of the good leadership, and we are in desperate need for good leadership right now.
Yeah. And considering the latest visit, this visit of Putin to Azerbaijan, we know that right now Azerbaijan is asking to be part of BRICS. And when you put Azerbaijan together with Iran, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Russia, these are sources of energy, and they're going to control everything. BRICS going to control everything. And it doesn't seem that the United States is thinking any of this, what's going on right now. They're just totally...
No, there is no belief that because we know the G7 is the power, the economic power in the world. And it has been since World War II. It has been the power in the world for sure. But as I talked about to Doug McGregor on my show earlier this afternoon, this is not 1991 anymore. In 1991, we were the preeminent, undisputed unipower on the planet. We were the military power, the economic power, the diplomatic power, cultural power. Anything you want to look at it, we were the power on it. We could literally do anything we wanted, and nobody could stand up to us, and nobody did, to include Russia and China. That's not the world that we live in anymore. China is done with that, and now that they have a powerful economy and military, and Russia is definitely done with it. And now even among our allies, people no longer believe in us. They see that we are doing things that are irrational, that are contradictory to the highest order, like accusing China of genocide, and then saying that Israel is not doing genocide, and here, have more bombs. All of those things are working against us here, and again, that's why I have a lot of trepidation about the future.
And the other thing, not only these countries, when you look at Hungary, Slovakia, these countries, when they're talking against the policies in Ukraine, they're just getting isolated from the European Union.
Yeah, but you see that this, I mean, because you have Hungary, Slovakia, Bulgaria to a certain extent, Turkey certainly. they're saying, hey, this is dumb and we're not going to participate in this kind of stuff. And I suspect, although it hasn't happened yet, that a lot of other countries kind of in the middle are going, I'd like to want to go with these guys here. And if they get a chance, I think they'll jump off the America side of this and onto that side pretty quickly. And I think that probably Viktor Orban has made a calculated risk that's why he has taken such a bold, out front position, with going to Kiev and to Moscow and to Beijing and just laying it all out on the line, saying, I'm putting my future on the line here by saying, this is what we should do. This is what we're not going to do. And I think that he's probably in his mind calculated that eventually these things are going to fall the way that you and I think that are going to, and that he's going to be looking really good at that point. But he's taking a gamble right now, because if it doesn't go that way, he may end up being isolated, but we'll see how it works out.
When you look at Middle East and Ukraine, which one, in your opinion, is much more dangerous in terms of using nuclear weapons?
Well, I think that the Europe is definitely the one, because you've got, two nuclear powers facing off with the NATO / the United States and with Russia. In the Middle East, it's possible because, the wild card is that the undeclared nuclear power of Israel could one day use its nuclear weapons, especially if it overextends and all of a sudden a lot of people turn against them. There's a very real possibility, if not probability, that if it went south, that they would use nuclear weapons, which is one of the reasons why I think you don't get a lot of countries aligned against them right now, because they know that they don't have nuclear weapons, so they couldn't play it. So I think that it's not zero, but it's less in the Middle East and higher in Europe.
And just to wrap up this session, I think that Zelensky would be prepared to use a dirty nuclear bomb against Russia. But in your opinion, is that possible for Washington to let him doing this?
Well, I think Zelensky has watched what's going on in Israel with a great deal of attention, and he sees that Netanyahu does do what he wants to do, isn't afraid of what the United States would do, and I think that he's coming close. I think that it is plausible that we didn't know that he was going to go into Kursk. That's what he has claimed. A lot of people say that's Lavrov, you mentioned. He said, oh, it's ridiculous. Of course, America knew. I'm not sure that that's correct, because I think he may have done something like that, which leads into your comment there that Zelensky, do something else that the United States doesn't want, and he could do a dirty bomb, which, again, is just irrational as it can get, because there is no possibility that it could result in anything good for him or his country. It could only hasten his destruction and possibly even his death if that were to happen. So I hope that he doesn't do it, but I don't rule it out that he could.
Yeah. Thank you so much for being with us today. Great pleasure as always.
Always my pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
See you soon. Bye-bye.